Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here. What an amazing turnout of friends and family in honor of Jess. On behalf of Mary Ann and her family, I would like to express their heartfelt gratitude for your presence here today as we gather to honor the wonderful and amazing life of Jess Peter. Before we start, I have to say, Jess would probably be shaking his head right now that people are here talking about him. But almost certainly, he would have a better story to tell. To begin, I would like to invite Dr. Keith Ramsey up to give an opening prayer.
Good evening. It's a blessing and an honor to be asked to speak on behalf of the Peter family and in reference to Dr. Peter and the impact that he made in my life. And if you look around this room, so many people's lives, as well as patients and the connections that he established. I was driving to a support group the last Friday of March to my mom's house near Baton Rouge. And that morning, before I left, I sent Mama Peter a prayer. It was around 5 o'clock. So I'm driving towards Baton Rouge. It's foggy, and I'm praying. And that morning, I sent her a copy of the Serenity Prayer. And as I get off the back roads near the bayous, and I'm praying, Mama Peter sends me this message: Keith, it would be an honor if you would come and speak for the memorial. And I said, Mama Peter, I'm going to be there. Anytime anybody asks you to do something good, you say yes if you can do it. The amazing thing is that morning I was going to speak to a women's support group who had lost their husbands, about 30 women in New Roads, Louisiana. So it's amazing how God works and how he speaks to us. So I'm going to start off with that prayer. If everyone would just close your eyes for a second and take some deep breaths. Lord, we ask for serenity to accept those things that we cannot change. Lord, we ask for courage to change those things that we can. And Lord, we ask for the wisdom to know the difference. Thank you, Lord, for your guidance. Thank you, Lord, for your oversight. And thank you, Lord, for your love and your angels that are blessing us today. I gave that CD and that prayer out to everybody today. And this is something that I use as an inspiration for my patients. Every month, my patients are saying, Doc, you got a new CD? So it goes back to the DJ days of giving out positive messages and at the same time giving out a prayer. Because the medicines that we use are imperfect. The tools that we use are man-made and imperfect. But our spiritual connection, and we have angels that are here, Dr. Peter among them, who are watching over us and encouraging. So with that note, I would like to say thank you, be blessed, and amen.
Thank you on behalf of the Peter family for being here to celebrate the life of our dear Jess. We are truly honored by your presence. Jess did not like funerals, but he loved the opportunity to get together with friends and family. So thank you for coming here to remember and talk about precious memories. It has been said that Jess was at the forefront of cardiology during his years at Duke, and many of you can speak to that. And Jess was also at the center of my life and of the lives of our children he loved so deeply, John, Alex, and Jennifer, and the cherished grandchildren, Josh, Kellen, Xander, Dylan, and Kyler. They are here today, and I hope you'll have a chance to connect with them. Jess supported and encouraged each of them in everything they pursued, as children and as adults, and he was endlessly proud of who they had become. Jess was my hero throughout the 64 years of our marriage, and even in the 3 years before that when we were going together. Was it love at first sight? Well, maybe. We met when I was 18 and he was 23. And from that moment on, we were never apart. We never needed a timeout. We were very lucky. The romance never faded. In 1965, Jess was part of the Vietnam-era Berry Plan, which allowed physicians to defer military service until they finished their training. He was proud to serve in the Navy, and at the Portsmouth Naval Hospital, where he cared for sailors and veterans, directed the cath lab, and had wonderful professional opportunities. We bought our first house in a subdivision where lots of naval officers lived. We paid $17,500 for what my niece called a beauty house. It was our first big venture into buying a home for our family. After returning to Duke, buying our farm in Orange County played a pivotal role in Jess's decision to stay at Duke on faculty. Like most completing fellows, he looked at several practice opportunities throughout the United States. One day he came home excitedly telling me about a long conversation he'd had with a farmer he cared for in clinic that day. He was so energized by it, it made me curious. And I asked, would you like to have a farm? And he said, you know, I think I would. The first farm we visited was the one we bought. It was overgrown with vines and badly neglected, but it had two undeniable virtues. It sat along a river and the price was right. Our offer was accepted, and with that, the decision to stay at Duke was sealed. Not long after, as we worked side by side to restore it, Jess said to me, you know what I like about this place? We'll never be finished with it. And he was right, as any farmer knows. For Jess, hard work was also a kind of relaxation. He discovered his mighty green thumb, and the farm magnified his love of nature. He was a talented gardener and could be found growing seedlings of just about anything, from vegetables, trees, Siberian irises, to John's pepper plants. You also might find him happily sitting on the dock of the farm pond, feeding dog kibbles to the remaining few 50-year-old Israeli carp that he brought to the pond as juveniles to keep the aquatic grasses under control. But back to Duke. He loved his work in the cath lab, the people he worked with, mentored, and laughed alongside. It was an essential part of who he was, and that was so important to me. I was so proud of him. If you worked with Jess, you knew his respect, his kindness, and his warmth. And just as important, he had a rich life beyond work. I remember after he retired and people asked him how he was adjusting, he said, every day is a Saturday, and I love Saturdays. At home, Jess was a true partner in every sense. He was also a fixer. If something broke and it didn't require a license to fix it, he would almost certainly have it repaired by nightfall. He did worry a bit about my lack of interest in learning the 3 TV remotes, of which he was the undisputed expert. From time to time, he would tease me, if I'm not here, how are you going to watch TV? And I would say, don't worry, one of my kids or grandkids will teach me. We did nearly everything together. We went to our children's and grandchildren's events, cheered on Duke athletics, traveled across the US, Europe, and China, skied, hunted for antiques, tended a thriving vegetable garden and a farm. Hosted annual lobster parties for the cardiology fellows for many years, and during retirement we swam and worked out 3 days a week at the Sportsplex and enjoyed the Sunday family dinners. If one of us was in the foreground, the other was not far behind. I cooked the food, and Jess loaded the dishwasher with precision. He washed the dogs and I towel dried them. And above all, we supported each other in every activity, whether together or separately. If you knew Jess, you know he had a quiet confidence about him that made me know everything was going to be okay. And I feel that absence every day. Even at 90, when his walk began to slow down, and he spoke of feeling older, what stands out to me was his remarkable strength, physically and mentally, right up to the last day of his life. The suddenness of his passing still shocks me. But then I think how fitting for him to leave quietly, without pain, and without a fuss. That was pure Jess. He was a blessing to me, to our family, and to all of us whose lives he touched.
That was great, Mom. Thank you. So my name's John Peter. I'm the oldest sibling of my parents, Robert, Jess, and Mary Ann Peter. I want to thank everyone for being here also, and to recognize my father, particularly Dr. Mike Sketch, which means his wife Beth was also helping, overseeing the Duke part of the service. It means a lot to my mom, myself, and the rest of the Peter family. I do also want to recognize that Dad was a mentor to many, and just two of his worth that I think should be mentioned would be Al Bueller, who was his track coach, and Dr. Morris from cardiology. And these are people that he was friends with until they passed. My children, Kel and Dylan, will be speaking later on in the program. I also should recognize Chip England, who's our adopted member of our family, who is 2 years older than me and was the escort for our high school farm parties. And I think the statute of limitations are over in case someone or two people had a beer. I did bring that up. So I want to share just a few childhood memories, because I think they shed some light on my father, and it also will tie into cardiology. So I was, again, the firstborn, and when I was around 2, we were in Norfolk, and then came back to Durham, where I was born when I was around 5, and then from age 5, and then also my brother, who's 4 years younger, my dad coached Little League Baseball, and Bob Drake, who's still our family friend, is where we got to know Bob, because he was a coach too. So my dad coached for over 10 years, and the significance about that was that I realized at an early age that I was lucky that I had a father who cared for me, because many times after a game, and the game would be over, my dad would go back to work, and he wouldn't get home till late that night, and then sometimes he was on call, it'd be early in the morning. And I even knew then, because I saw some of the kids, not all the kids, but some of the kids, my teammates, their fathers weren't at the game, just to watch them, and some of the kids were unfortunate enough not to have a father. So that early on struck me as that I was a lucky kid. I do want to mention, here's a little cardiology side note, that in kindergarten we had show and tell, and my dad, at the time, cardiology, invasive cardiology was more research oriented, had not broken through to be mainstream, and he researched pigs. And he heard about what kids were bringing to show and tell. And so he was going to get me a pig heart in a big mason jar. And my mom's common sense went out that glass, kindergarten, and pig hearts don't probably do well. So I never did get to show that pig heart, but I do want to mention that. So years later, between age 15 and 19, I had a summer jobs at Duke Hospital and worked starting in patient transport, and you can't do that now, but back then you could. But when I was around 19, I was fortunate enough to be assigned to cardiology. And I got to work in the cath lab. And one of my assignments was doing blood gases. But I got to see my dad in action with Dr. Bihar and Dr. Kong and the rest of the kind of legendary crew, and see a person who was a teacher, who loved his patients, who was an amazing tactician, and that it was his element. And so I feel very fortunate to have seen that when a person's in the prime is where they should be. So I just want to mention that, and that how much he loved that assignment, and yeah, he was good at it. And then moving on, the passions besides cardiology, which my mom has mentioned some of these, but he loved sports, and he put together a softball team called Club Med, and I was lucky enough to have, I think, Alex, did you ever play it? Yeah, so my brother got to play with me, and then my friends Courtney and Joe were on the team, and then of course the rest of the folks were from the Duke medical field. But he loved that, and it was just something outside of cardiology, but it also, I guess, tied into it. The farm, of course, was his passion. Antiques, the skills of the past are something that he loved until his final day. And as Mom mentioned, he loved being in the pond, feeding the 50-year-old grass carp, and then Duke sports, I guess, it also sticks out. And so probably the longest thing I have done in my life, because of my dad and my mom, is going to Duke basketball and football games. And I've done it since I was in diapers. And of course, my parents did it when they were dating. So I'm 63, they did it for over 65 years. So just something that it's rare that somebody does something longer than anything else they've done. And so that will be missed, but I think it's also time. And then the other thing that, of course, was my dad's passion were friendships. And looking at the folks here, we know that was true. And I got to see what long-term friendships, the importance, the significance, and the joy that they bring. And then, of course, finally, his family. All of us, but particularly when he saw what his grandkids were doing. And those were some of his best days when he heard about whatever exploits they were succeeding in. So finally, the lessons I think my dad taught me was, from a career, find a career that you enjoy, you're skilled or talented at, and you become proficient in. Value of finding something outside your career, so that you have other interests, and that's not the only thing in your life. The value of developing long-lasting friendships, as I've mentioned, and then family. The value of family and being with your family and spending time together. And my dad wasn't perfect. Sometimes his frustration filter could be turned off. But I never met a perfect person, and I'm not talking about perfect matches. But if you have met a perfect person, then bless your heart. But overall, one of the things he did not have a fault in is he was never envious of anyone. And what actually made him the most content is when he knew his coworkers, his friends, his family, and his organizations were doing well. That's what pleased him the most. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Alex Peter, and I'm the middle kid. We appreciate you all being here. It does our hearts good. My mom and John covered a lot of stuff, so what I'd like to say is that, and I've heard a lot of nice things about my dad since I've been talking with people, and it's great to hear. He was a great doctor. He was a great man, great dad, and granddad. What I'd like to say is he was a very generous man.
He was generous with the thing that should be the most valuable to us all, which is time. He gave us, as busy as he was, he always gave us his time. And of course, he showed up to, all the events we did, the place I was in, football, graduation from boot camp, college, police academy, the SBI academy. He was always there. He was always proud. And that was so important to me. And he was generous with his time with people that weren't in the family. John mentioned baseball, the Borden Bricks baseball team that we played on. That was a huge deal. Bob coached me when I was at the Borden Bricks T-ball team. You had an awesome 70s mustache. I still have the picture up on my wall. It was awesome. And and John had alluded to it, but there were some kids that would not have been able to play baseball had it not been for my dad, or with the Borden Bricks. They didn't have a ride. They didn't have a way there. And so for years, my dad would, before every practice and before every game, he would pick up those kids, and after every practice and game, he would take them home every time. For years he did this. He never looked for a thank you or never complained about it. He was happy to do it. And that was my dad. He was a very generous man. He was a great man. I will miss him till the day I leave this earth. Love him very much. Thank you again for all being here.
Jennifer. I'm the youngest, and I just wanted to share some fun memories I had with my dad. Before the start of each school year, he would take me to Kmart to pick out new shoes. The trip never felt complete until we tracked down the blue light special. He often had to work on the weekends, and sometimes I was lucky enough to tag along. While he was busy rounding on patients, I would pass the time typing on the typewriter and spinning in the chairs. At home, while he would read the newspaper or watch the news, I would style his hair with my mom's curlers and plenty of hairspray. I had a hard time getting the curlers to stay, but I gave him a pretty good mohawk. I think there's pictures too. When I was about 4.5 years old, and I had to calculate that from Google, he took me to see Ella Fitzgerald and Count Basie at Cameron Indoor Stadium. I distinctly remember Dad telling me, this is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Over the years, he taught me so much. How to fish at the farm and off the pier at the Outer Banks. I would catch John's bait for his shark fishing. He taught me how to cut the grass with a riding lawnmower, which I still love to do today. He taught me how to appreciate the simple joy of digging in the dirt and watching what you planted grow. He taught me to be proud of my name by writing every letter clearly, just as he always did. Around the time when I was a teenager, Dad, Alex, and I, we developed nicknames for each other. John was at college, but we also share J names, so you might get this. We called Dad D or Big D. Alex was A or Big A. And I was J or Big J. I relied on him a lot. And he was always there. He was the fixer of all things, and the first person I would call when something went wrong. Shortly after Mark and I were married, one of our dogs brought in a possum, threw a live possum through our dog door, and dropped it in our bedroom. Upon discovering this, I calmly screamed and instinctively called my dad before devising a plan with Mark. Dad was known for his dadisms. If I was procrastinating, he'd say, "If you snooze, you lose." After a breakup, he'd reassure me by saying, "There's a bus every 15 minutes. And in his later years, he often said, "You only have so many steps in life." Since his death, I've thought about those words often. To me, they meant value being able to move through life freely, independently, and on your own terms. Well done, Dee. You did.
Thank you for being here. Your presence means a lot to us. Thank you so much. I'm the son-in-law. When I first met my father-in-law, like any son-in-law, I wondered how much in common we'd have. Every now and then, little clues would appear that maybe we were more alike than I realized. One of the funniest things was discovering early on that somehow we wore the exact same obscure brand of discontinued underwear. I still have no idea how that conversation even happened, but it did. And when it came to restaurants, we had the same standard. If you left hungry, the place had completely failed. Small portions offended us both on a very visceral level. Over the years, though, the similarities that mattered most became clearer. We shared a drive to succeed, a deep love for friends and family, an appreciation for just sitting quietly together without needing to fill the silence. There was also something about the way he moved through life that I came to deeply respect. He had an unusual self-sufficiency about him. He believed that there was real value in learning how to do things yourself. And honestly, I felt like he could fix almost anything. Like my own father, he also had these dadisms that carried more wisdom than you realized at first. Some of these you heard from Jennifer, and that was his way of caring for people. Practical, direct, and honest. There was a stretch over several years where the four of us went most Sundays to Grillworks Diner in Mebane for breakfast. And almost every time, he and I ordered the same thing, canned corned beef hash and eggs. Looking back, that feels meaningful to me now because our relationship grew the same way those breakfasts happened, steadily, comfortably, without a lot of performance or unnecessary words. Eventually we got to the point where we understood each other very well. The mutual respect between us just grew, and it was just wonderful, and this happened naturally over time. And what may have been, you could consider differences at first, actually the things I realized we most shared in life. And I'm grateful I had time to really see who he was, because the man I came to know was someone who I deeply respected, and in many ways, I deeply recognize.
Thank you guys again for coming. We're going to start with the grandkids. So as we mentioned before, and a couple people hit on, what is Jess Peter, or who was he? The word legacy comes to mind, hero for sure comes to mind. But for our grandkids, he was D-Dog. He was all of those things and more. And for me, the man could do no wrong. I didn't come into the family the traditional way, but he never let me feel that way. He shared Duke basketball with me. We were just talking, it's been 30 years now since I've gone to those games with him, and it was incredibly impactful in my life and something I will cherish forever. Those games turned to my own as I grew older, and as I mentioned before, whatever he said, and as most people alluded to, you just trusted D-Dog. My track coach, I had a separate warm-up routine from everybody else, and he would say, yeah, that's because D-Dog told him that. But rain or shine, and I mean rain or shine, snow, him and Mima would drive, many hours to come see all of my games. That meant the world to me, because you look over and you see him, his quiet confidence, and you felt confident. Over the years, those phone calls did change. We had a very unique relationship. It wasn't grandson and grandfather, it was one of respect. As we continued to call, those phone conversations went from Duke recruiting, which we would go deep, sometimes guys not even 16 years old yet, but we knew everything about them. And it was amazing how much the man could retain and how much he remembered from every conversation we had. As those conversations got older, we start talking about other things and other passions, and one thing that always stuck out in my mind is he was never afraid, pun intended, to go into the weeds. I'm an extreme extrovert, I probably always will be, and sometimes my family tells me he never told me to do that. Every moment he was willing to go as far as I wanted to go into the conversation. We would talk about stocks for hours, and he still had the old school book, and I could hear the pages flipping. I mean, even a couple months ago, the conversations I'll share the most were the last few we had. I told him how I met the girl of my dreams, and he told me how unbelievably proud he was of me. And although he did say that a lot as growing up, when you look at what he's achieved in life and what he meant to me, he was my hero. It's hard to put into words, but I thank you guys so much for coming here, and I thank you, Mima, for giving me every opportunity to succeed in life, but more importantly, showing me the way and making me understand that no matter what we do in life, family is the most important. No matter where we go, family will always be there. Thank you guys for coming.
Hi everyone, my name is Kellen, and I'd like to thank you very much for being here. We're incredibly honored to have you celebrate my grandfather, or as Josh aptly put, how we refer to him in our family as D-Dog. Growing up, I never gave much thought to being surrounded by giants. D-Dog was a singular man of many, many accomplishments, but to me, he was first and foremost D-Dog, the most stubborn man to exist on the entire planet, whose affinity for tubular meat and Dollar Tree LED light bulbs continues to be unmatched. Didon's stubbornness took on many forms, and one of the most meaningful ones for me was how ever-present he was. He showed up for everything, even things that I'd prefer he missed. I was the most anxiety-riddled, mediocre softball player to ever grace a bench, and yet there he was every single game. Didon was a man who was very sure of how things should work. Not always necessarily on how things work, but how they should work. Many of you here have had the privilege of visiting our family farm that he and my wonderful grandmother, Mima, have built together. While at the farm, you more than likely were bitten by a mosquito, a common occurrence when existing in North Carolina beside a large body of water. Now, if you ever had the audacity to tell my grandfather that you were bitten by a mosquito at the farm, you were more than likely met with the following response. No, you weren't. It was simple as that. He sprayed for mosquitoes with a concoction banned 7 times over by the EPA, and therefore, there is not a single mosquito in existence there. It's that simple. He was certain. He was certain his refusal to accept farm mosquitoes. He was certain that he would always go watch his granddaughter sit on a bench beside the softball field because he knew I would be looking for him. And even though it's illogical, stubborn even, I was certain that he would be here forever. For me, that's how things should work, but unfortunately, it's not how they do work. I love him and I miss him, and I think the best thing that we can do is be a little bit more like him. So please go eat a hot dog. Plant many, many tomatoes. Show up stubbornly for the people that you love, and never ever acknowledge the mosquitoes. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Dylan. Thank you very much for being here. I'm sure there's an absurdly long and equally absurd sounding German word that could convey my sentiments much more succinctly, but given that no such word exists in English to my knowledge, you're going to have to bear with me for a few minutes here. Prior to this year, I've been fortunate to have had a rather distant relationship with death. I've lost dogs in the past, which those of you who love animals, a trait which my grandfather no doubt shared, will know that is no easy loss. I was, however, fortunate to have been blissfully ignorant to the impact of death for the bipedal members of my family, until this year at least. Alas, such ignorance cannot last forever. Death is an acquaintance we all have to make at some point or another. As others have stated far more eloquently throughout history, death is ironically one of life's few certainties. One surprising thing I have learned from this experience, from this unwanted yet unavoidable new acquaintance, is that death itself for me is not the most difficult aspect of losing a loved one. When I found out my grandfather had passed, I was sad, of course, but the most definitive sentiment I felt was an overwhelming sense of numbness. Those of you who know me well are likely aware that I'm not always the most outwardly emotional of individuals, so this reaction may not be profoundly surprising. A part of me selfishly felt relieved that I had appeared to skip the grieving process, or at least had opted for a greatly condensed version. Alas, I quickly discovered that I had no such luck. I quickly learned that death has a much more difficult relative named absence. Death is rude, death is awkward, it is intrusive, it's impatient, and for me at least it was numbing. Although it is almost never welcome in the first place, it can be said that at least death does not overstay its visit. Absence, unfortunately, can't take the hint. It shows up in death's wake with its bags packed and a lease you have no choice but to co-sign. Absence did not fully introduce itself to me until several days after my grandfather had passed. I'd gone over to my grandparents' house to collect several of his suit jackets and accessories, some of which I'm wearing now. The man had style, of course, and there's no reason that should go to waste. It was in his closet as I was picking up his old suits, belts, and ties that my numbness succeeded and I fully broke down. For the first time, my mind truly understood that he was gone. Absence had finally made my acquaintance. Now, you may think what I'm describing is better defined as grief, but I believe absence is a bit more complex. Absence and grief are often, but not always, related. For some, the absence that moves in following one's passing may bring little to no feeling at all. In the most unfortunate cases, this absence may even bring relief. You see, the nature of one's absence is antithetical to that of one's presence. In a somewhat cruel paradox, the more loving your presence is, the more painful your absence will be when the two trade places. To hint towards how I regarded my grandfather's presence, I'll simply state that this absence is very painful indeed. Initially, this pain is the only quality I associated with the sense of absence. However, as I've said, absence is a bit more complex. Absence is not just pain and grief, although those can certainly be two of its qualities. Being the unrepentant hypocrite that I am, I'll contradict my previous claim that absence is simply the antithesis of presence. The pain and grief brought by one's absence is a reflection of all the joy, love, and support previously carried by one's presence. Absence is not simply awful, though it is that sometimes. It is also, in a strange way, somewhat wonderful. This absence is not something I ever wanted, but it is something I've come to appreciate, as it guarantees the impact that my grandfather had on me in life stays with me, even though he's no longer here physically. I will appreciate this absence every time I see a Duke game. I will appreciate this absence every time I watch Band of Brothers or The Pacific. I will appreciate this absence every time I'm at the family farm. And I will appreciate this absence as I continue my academic career, the opportunity to which I owe the support of many, but most paramountly that of my grandfather. Hopefully someday soon I can call myself Dr. Peter as well, though my intended doctorate seems far more intent on raising blood pressure than that of my grandfather. I will appreciate this absence every time I see Civil War revolvers, or when someone tries to subtly overfeed dogs at the dinner table. And I will appreciate this absence every time someone says, geez, at any inconvenience. Finally, I will appreciate this absence when I see an extra chair at the dinner table that used to be filled. Dida, thank you for everything. I'm so fortunate that your absence is as difficult as it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for being here. I'm Xander, one of the grandchildren. I'm not as eloquent or tall as Dylan, so I'll do my best. All my life I have had an incredible grandfather. He's always been an example of the man that I want to be. He's endlessly supported us. I'm a writer, Kyler's a chef, Josh is the businessman. Dida has supported all of us no matter what we wanted to do. Full speed ahead, and he, like was mentioned, always showed up for every single thing. I was also a mediocre soccer player. I was the bench warmer, and he still showed up to watch. You know, that's who he was. He was someone who loved life, and he always pursued exactly what made him happy and fulfilled, whether it was literally saving people's lives, watching Duke play, or just sitting at the end of the dock, chucking a handful of dog food to the carp, and dogs as well. But I hope once I get to this stage in my own life that I've created such a long-lasting legacy of happiness for my entire family and success as well. Thanks for always being there, for all the laughs and the love. Love you and hope to see you again.
Thank you all for being here. Not only did I look up to my parents, but I looked up to Dida. It was an honor having him in my life. He's a man of many talents when it comes to the medical field, farming, gardening, coin collecting, Duke basketball enthusiast, and a good style in suits. One of my favorite memories of Dida was going to the Duke basketball games with him and Mima, and not knowing the difference between him and the crazy towel guy. One of my last memories of Dida was when he visited me at the Hillsborough Bake Shop for breakfast, and it was really nice and quiet in there, peaceful jazz music. I go up to Dida and he says, "How you doing, big fella?" Dida's changed the lives of many people, not only day to day, but for the rest of their lives. It's not something that you see every day, having such an influential person in your life. I can say that I'm thankful that that person to me is Dida. I'm truly blessed to have you in my life. You will be missed, big fella. I love you more than words can express. Thank you, guys.
Wow, what beautiful expressions of love by Jess's family. It's truly an honor to be here to remember Jess, a man who was not only a colleague, but a mentor and a dear friend to me. I had the pleasure of knowing Jess for nearly 40 years and working side by side with him in the cath lab for 18 of those years. During that time, I came to appreciate not only his extraordinary skill as a person and a physician, but truly what a remarkable person Jess was. Jess was in every sense the consummate cardiologist and interventionalist. He loved the work, and it showed. For more than 38 years on the Duke faculty, he dedicated himself to providing the very best care to his patients. He was a leader in the field, deeply involved in developing new ways to open blocked coronary arteries. He had an innovative curiosity. He would literally take apart interventional devices and modify them, trying to make them better. But what truly set Jess apart was the combination of knowledge, judgment, and instinct he brought to every case. In the cath lab, whenever anyone ran into trouble, there was a common refrain: go get Jess. And he always came. I remember one night in particular, I was on call, and I had been working for hours to open a closed vessel, and I just couldn't get it done. Finally, even though Jess was not on call, at 3 a.m., I called Jess at home. Within 10 minutes, Jess calmly walked into the cath lab to help. That's who he was. He was always there, no matter the hour, no matter the circumstance. And it wasn't just in moments of crisis. Every year at Duke, the interns get a surprise day off. And it was never required that the faculty stepped in to cover the service. But Jess always volunteered. And on that particular day, Jess would walk into the hospital so proud, wearing the same white pants that he wore as an intern. And amazingly, he could still fit into them. It was classic Jess, though. Humble, team-oriented, and quietly leading by example. He never saw anything as beneath him. He simply did what needed to be done for the good of the team. Jess trained over 300 fellows, and every one of them benefited from his presence. Fellows loved doing cases with Jess, not just because he was so skilled, but because he made them feel capable. Over the years, I have received countless calls from former fellows describing complex cases and cases that they encountered complications in. And almost inevitably, they would say, at the moment, I found myself asking, what would Jess do? That is a true measure of a great teacher, and Jess was truly a great teacher. He didn't just pass on knowledge. He shaped how people think, how they approach problems, and how they care for patients. But as great as Jess was technically, it was his humanity that made him truly unforgettable. He had a remarkable ability to put people at ease, even in the most stressful situations. I remember a new nurse in the lab. She'd been in the lab only 2 weeks, and she found herself doing a case with Jess of a patient in cardiogenic shock. And she was very anxious, as was everyone in that room. And about halfway through the case, Jess turned to her and calmly said, "Did you do something different with your hair? It really looks nice." And just like that, the tension in the room melted. And 30 years later, this nurse still remembers it, and she played a key role in Jess's retirement here at the Washington Do 20 years ago today. That was Jess. He understood that taking care of patients also meant taking care of the people around you. And of course, there was his humor. Just like there was the dadisms in the cath lab, there was Jessisms. To a fellow struggling with imaging, it was not uncommon to hear over the loudspeaker Jess say, "It's that beating thing in the middle of the chest." He had a quick wit, a mischievous streak, and an ability to make even the hardest day a little lighter. Jess had a particular fondness for Bojangles biscuits and hot dogs, and whenever he went out to work on the mobile cath lab, he always had the team stop to get biscuits. Now, on one occasion, I was in the cath lab with Jess, and I saw him in the control room eating a biscuit. And that day, nobody had brought in biscuits or any food. So I wasn't sure how Jess got this biscuit. So I went up to him and I said, "Jess, where did you get the biscuit?" And with a subtle smile, he said, "I found it in my white coat pocket." And then, with a smirk on his face, he looked at me and said, "I think it was from last week." And in a way, that story captures Jess perfectly. He was unpretentious and completely comfortable in the cath lab. He didn't stand on ceremony. He was one of us. And he found joy in the simplest things, even in the middle of very serious work. But beyond the lab, Jess was truly a Renaissance man. Marianne and her family beautifully highlighted many of his pursuits outside of work. He had a deep curiosity about the world, and he lived life fully. And at the center of it all was his family. He loved Marianne deeply. As Marianne said, they shared 64 years of marriage. He spoke of her often, always with great admiration and pride. Whether it was her accomplishments in nursing, or her successes in swimming, or her beautiful work in pottery. Marianne promised that to Jess she would swim in the Masters Swimming National Championship. And so several weekends ago, Marianne swam in 3 events. And in all 3 events, she won the bronze, and she broke the state record in all 3 events. And you know, Jess was beaming in pride. He was equally proud of his children and grandchildren, and he made sure we all knew it. His love for his family was an inspiration to all of us. In the end, Jess's legacy is not only the innovations he contributed to cardiology, or the hundreds of fellows he trained. It was the way he made people feel, the confidence he gave them, the kindness he showed, and the standard he set. We are all better caregivers because of Jess. And most importantly, we are all better people for having known him. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Chip England, and I met Doc Peter and his family in the fall of 1979. I was a freshman at Duke University a mere 47 years ago. The Duke basketball program had they had a cool little deal where they would try to introduce a freshman basketball player who's away from home and doesn't get home often to a Duke Durham family. And so you could get a home-cooked meal or two and get out, and get in Durham, get around Durham. Debbie Ridley, a manager on the Duke basketball team, recommended the Peters to the organization, and lucky me, we got matched up. So our first dinner took place, and this is a fun one. That home-cooked meal, it was, at the time, John is 16 as mentioned, Alex 12-ish, Jennifer 9, and you'll know where this is going because Mary Ann had a meeting that night, and she couldn't make the first dinner. That first dinner was a little overcooked. But we had an absolute blast. I'm not forgetting Hercules the dog as well. And I got lucky. I had the good fortune of being invited to the Sunday night dinners. I'd bring my laundry, and did it myself because everyone was very busy. 60 Minutes was always playing on the television, and Doc Peters reading, as it was mentioned, the Durham Morning Herald. And you would think, being a Duke basketball player at the time, that I was giving the family cool insights on the Duke basketball program. Here's how a certain conversation would go. Doc Peter would look down over the newspaper. Hey Chip, you heard about that kid, Johnny Dawkins, out of Washington, D.C.? And I'd say, I haven't, Doc. And Doc would go, well, I heard he's pretty good. And 2 weeks later, Johnny Dawkins would be in Cameron on his recruiting trip, and yeah, he ended up being pretty good. A couple weeks later, same thing. Hey, there's this kid, Mark Gallery, out of Phoenix. You heard anything on him? I said, no, Doc, I haven't. He goes, well, I heard he's pretty good. Sure enough, Mark's at Cameron on his recruiting trip, and so it goes. A couple weeks later, hey, Chip, you heard about this kid from California, Jay Billis? I heard. My answer, I heard he's pretty good. I had to come up and have some knowledge of something. So beyond the great dinners with the family, I was fortunate enough to be invited to go to John's great baseball games at Durham Academy. Some of his teammates are here who I cherish those times. To Alex football games, and he was an aspiring actor going to his plays in and around Durham. And Jennifer, I corrupted. I was a huge pro wrestling fan, and at a tender age of 10 years old, I'm dragging her to these great outposts at Durham High School to see the greats, Flair, Snuka, Harley Race, Dusty Rhodes. They were our favorites. And eventually we branched out to Raleigh, and the parents trusted me. Think about that. I was only 18 or 19 at the time. And that evolved to chaperoning some parties at the farm, and being lucky to be invited to some Thanksgivings. So things are sitting pretty well. It's my junior year, I'm feeling pretty good. I get in a little pickle on campus. The Duke Judicial Board, I had a situation where I had a little proceeding to happen in front of that board. And that board, the Duke Judicial Board, is very fair, but very strict. And in my particular case, I was allowed to have a character witness before I would go in and speak on my behalf. And we all know where this is going. I called the fixer. Doc, I'll need a little help. And I thought of this many times over the last couple of weeks preparing for today. He didn't ask, he asked, are you okay? Is everybody okay? And I said, everybody's fine. He goes, I'll be there. So a couple of weeks later, Doc is there. As he's mentioned, he's there for a lot of people in here. He comes in, how the proceedings worked. He would go speak to the tribunal first. I would sit alone in a room and wait, and then he would be ushered out on the stage. So I don't hear any words. I'm sitting here quaking in my boots, waiting for my turn, and fortunate that Doc Peter has come to speak on my behalf. Doc Peter's ushered out, I'm ushered in, and I'm waiting for the steely-eyed gaze of this tribunal. And I look, I go from one end, and I go to the other. And I swear to you, they're looking at me like I had just saved a puppy from a burning building. When Doc Peter vouches for you, it means something. All of us here, looking back, all the different roles, he played: husband, father, colleague, mentor, grandpa, friend, my Duke dad, teammate. We all know Dr. Robert Peter would never need a character witness, nor would Marianne or any of the kids. It's the Peter family way. I love you guys.
Good afternoon. I'm David Canzeri from Atlanta, Georgia, and it is such a privileged opportunity for me to be with you, who, many of you, like Jess, have been so formative in my life and in my career. Uniquely, March of this year was not the first time that I learned of Jess's passing. More than a year before, I received an erroneous message that Marianne and Jess's home in Hillsborough had come for sale, and the derivative that was that Jess had died. I immediately called the Bihars. Lenore answered, and with overwhelming relief, she reassured me that Jess and Marianne were just fine and that the messaging was all an error. And just as many true stories are too much to just make up, I received about a week later a phone call from the area code 919, and it went something like this. Hello, David? Yes. It's me, Jess Peter. I'm calling from heaven, and they're only letting me use a payphone, and I have one dime, so I'll be quick. But I'm doing just fine. And just as that is a true story, I know in truth that Jess is in heaven, and his memories last us far more than just a payphone call. For me, whether Jess knew it or not, I know that I have been blessed with more than 3 decades of experiences with Jess Peter. My first memory of Jess was as a second-year medical student in the early 1990s at Duke. And like Jess, I would graduate from the college here at Duke and then later medical school. And it was in my second year of medical school that Jess and Dr. Kong were responsible for teaching us as medical students the cardiovascular physical exam. Deaf to my stethoscope, I could never hear the gallops and the heart murmurs that Jess so eloquently described, and I would often take my own free time to come back to the hospital wards later and ask the permission for patients to listen to their hearts a second time. One inconsistent consistency for me was that practice for me did not make me perfect. And so I would page Jess through the hospital operator, and I would ask him in the middle of his day to come to the 7th floor ward and to help me. For those of you in the practice of clinical medicine, to think about a young medical student calling you in the busyness of your day, interrupting your schedule to listen to heart sounds is unimaginable. But not for Jess, not for Jess. I remember he would always say over the phone, give me about 10 minutes and I'll meet you at the patient's bedside. And he always did so. And he would hold the stethoscope against the patient's chest, and then he would hand over the earpieces to me as he was still holding the stethoscope. And at least then I would pretend that I could hear what he did. Fast forward then 2 years to my 4th year medical student, passionate for interventional cardiology. Duke was at the nation's forefront for innovation and interventional cardiology, and everyone knew that Jess was the focal point of the cath lab. Jess was the doctor's doctor. If you didn't know how approachable, how generous, how gracious Jess was, it really could seem quite intimidating. So during our rotation in the cardiac care unit, Jamie Jollis allowed me to break away with one of the cardiology fellows in the cath lab, and Jess was the attending for this particular case. At 6 feet 4 inches with my frame, I was handed Jimmy Chang's lead apron. So imagine a halter top and a mini skirt to my ear. But my excitement threw safety to the wind. I didn't care. I wanted to just be part of this case. And in an era of coronary perfusion balloons, with very extended durations of these balloons inflated in a patient's heart artery, Steve Hearn, the fellow at the time, allowed me to inflate the balloon, and then I anxiously said, "Now what's next?" And Jess, ever watching from the control room, came over the intercom and said, "Have a seat in that chair, big fella. We don't want this to be too exciting." Jess didn't need to explain himself. He valued simplicity over drama. He favored consistency over short-lived success. And he did not need to be on stage, but behind that leaded glass curtain of the control booth in the cardiac catheterization laboratory, he was our conductor. And yes, indeed, in the rare instance that it did become exciting, you wanted to have Jess there. Each of us has a very special memory of Jess. And for myself, Jess was an educator. He was an advisor. He was a confidant. He was a supporter. And in many ways, I'm describing for myself a second father. For me, the selection as a Jess Peter Interventional Fellow meant more to me of making Jess proud, of recognizing Jess's name than any recognition toward myself. And I'm very certain that others here today feel exactly that same way. Our relationship with Jess was the most natural and easiest of relationships. And Jess's investment in us, it was real and authentic. But being a Jess Peter Interventional Fellow was not always easy. Among taking care of some of the most obese patients ever treated, at least according to Jess's eyes, there was involved a lot of work invested in getting a quote, "That's an AW, big fella." And how AW ever came to be an Academy Award, well, only Jess would know. But still, his impact reached far more than words alone, having taken care of tens of thousands of patients, countless lives saved during his career, and performing procedures that many people, if anyone, was capable of doing so, but yet doing it with a sense of calmness and a sense of humility. It's unimaginable to consider how many patient lives were positively affected, not only directly through Jess's care, but through the many that whom he trained in the United States, in Canada, in Latin America, and perhaps beyond. Jess also taught us what does not exist in textbooks. Not simply procedural skill sets, but broader issues ranging from navigating the academic hierarchy of new clinical medicine, or perhaps professional advancement, or even developing a collegial relationship with coworkers at every level, or in other instances, sharing very difficult news to grieving families. Jess and I shared a passion for early American furniture and pottery, and on some days he would rather talk about an upcoming auction sale than the cases of the day. But amidst these and other conversations of, yes, Duke basketball, Jess's garden, or an update on what Marianne, Jennifer, Alex, or John were up to, if you listen closely, Jess shared lessons for success that would last us not only throughout our career, but through our lifetimes. I'll always remember Jess once saying to me at the end of a workday in the catheterization laboratory with just the two of us sitting together, "David, you don't have to be best friends with everyone, but one day you may need someone's help, and you need to work with that person, and so you need to develop a relationship." And he was so right, and that theme still holds with me today. Jess did not know us by our username, our email, our social media postings. He simply knew us for who we are. It's remarkable to think of all the physicians whom Jess has trained who have become worldwide leaders in cardiovascular medicine, and yet Jess never asked for recognition or acknowledgement. He was simply content that he was a large part of their success. I know for sure that we and countless others are not only better off as doctors because Jess was here, but we are all better people because Jess was here. Yes, Jess had an admirable sense of humor. He was mischievous. And Jess wasn't selective in his pranks, although Mike Sketchvik, Bihar, and John Bowles might think otherwise. But in later years too, even during the COVID pandemic, for example, Jess would email me and others just to check in, share his admiration for healthcare workers on the front line. And then he would always add with a funny but provocative video or picture to keep things lighthearted. As we celebrate Jess, I am confident that he knew how much he was loved and by so many. I'm confident Jess knew how much he was loved and by so many. And for our younger generation today, I'm going to part with the words of Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters. There goes my hero, watch him as he goes. There goes my hero, he's ordinary. As elevated as Jess was in the hierarchy of Duke medicine, he was equally an ordinary hero. He was a common person achieving extraordinary feats, inspiring all around him, and best of all, he did not realize his influence, but rather he was just one of us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sunil Rao from New York City. I'm one of the hundreds of cardiology fellows that Jess taught to CAF. I remember I met Jess in 1999. I was just starting my first year of fellowship at Duke. And as a medicine resident, I was really not eager to do any procedures. In fact, starting in the cath lab, I was extremely nervous. But cathing with Jess changed my life. His easygoing confidence in the cath lab, his plain-spokenness, and his relationship with patients showed me what it meant to be a great interventional cardiologist. In fact, it wasn't long, like many people in the cath lab, that I started to subconsciously adopt some of Jess's phrasing. His verbiage like an AW for a great PCI result, for example. Since then, though, I haven't necessarily adopted his asking patients, how much do you eat every day? Or do you like your bacon crispy or undercooked with all that fat on it? Even after I finished my training, he never really stopped mentoring me in his own inimitable way. I remember when I was a second-year faculty member at Duke, I was cathing at the VA, and like many interventional cardiologists, I thought I was pretty hot stuff. And when you start thinking that you're pretty hot stuff, sometimes you start taking shortcuts. I did some pretty tough cases at the VA, and I decided to anonymize them. I burned them to a CD, and I mailed them to Jess to look at. A few weeks later, I got a page on my pager, and it said, from the operator, and it said, Dr. Peter. So I was pretty puffed up, and I decided to call him, and I said, hey, Jess, great to hear from you. And he said, Sunil, I got those cases that you sent me. You need to get more LAL on your shots. These are terrible. And you know what? He was right. And so even now, I remember, don't take any shortcuts. And he clearly had a way of cutting through nonsense. Early in my career, I was interested in forging an academic program. And I remember I was working on a project, and I summarized it for him one day in the cath lab. And instead of telling me his opinion, he told me a story. He said, I remember being at an antique store, and the guy was looking to buy a beautiful antique table that was missing a leg. And the prospective buyer asked the owner about the table and whether he should buy it. And the owner looked at him and said, the problem with three-legged tables is that they don't stand up very well. And that was it. And I was sort of puzzled. And then it dawned on me later on that day. He was telling me that my research was a three-legged table. And thank God he did, because it allowed me to take the next step towards making the research a little bit more meaningful. For most of his career, Jess Peter was synonymous with the Duke Cath Lab. And even on the day he retired, he had the best hands of anyone on the Cath Lab faculty. It was his love of the game that was infectious. Any day that you cathed with Jess was a great day. It was fun, it was educational, and you didn't want it to end. But even though he did thousands of cases and saved thousands of lives and trained hundreds of leading cardiologists around the world, it was his love for his wife and his family that was the real lesson. I'll never forget, we came here to the Washington Duke for a big fancy dinner. I can't remember, I think it was maybe for a visiting professor. And as we were leaving, I saw Jess take some of the 2 shrimps from the shrimp cocktail appetizer and put them in his pocket. And I jokingly said to him, are those for later? And he said, I'm taking these home to show Mary Ann. These are the biggest shrimp I've ever seen. Coincidentally, Jess and I shared the same birthday. I'll miss sending him a text every March 23rd, but I'll never forget everything he did for me. So here's a big AW to you, big fella. We'll miss you.
Hello everyone, my name is Manesh Patel, and what a tremendous celebration. I'm now currently get to be the division chief at Duke, and excited to celebrate this with you all. I have a few words from Dean Klopman, and then I'll share a few Jess stories. And you'll hear a lot of the same themes, but I think hopefully you'll get it. This is Dean Klopman's words, and again, Marianne, thank you for having us here. She said, Jess was an extraordinary physician, teacher, and colleague whose contributions at Duke are unmatched. However, just as importantly, the integrity, the humor, the person he was for so many, I think the family has spoken to. He was devoted to the family and to you and the children, and many at Duke have already spoken to his distinguished career, but I would just say it had a lasting impact. Of course, you've had a lasting impact at Duke too, with your distinguished career. And everyone who trained with him had the opportunity to understand the humor and the opportunity to actually get better as a person. And for generations of physicians, he made a difference. He will be deeply missed. Now, I was thinking about, those were Dean Klopman's words, and we really do appreciate them. I was thinking about what could I say that would represent all the work that Jess has meant to us. And I think there's a few of those that I think the colleagues and the trainees would say. And this is some of the things that I think a lot of the people we were talking to came forward with, which was, there was a particular calm that came through the cath lab when Jess was there. You've already heard of the humor and the work, and I would say, when there was trouble, he was the fixers. Now, most mornings, as you've already heard, you can find him in the cath lab with a newspaper and a biscuit in hand, not hurried, and the day would begin. And if the days happened to go sideways, and unfortunately sometimes it would, Jess would appear, not with a panic, not with a moment of unjudgment, but just steady sureness that would help us. Now, I was an intern and a resident, and then came to do cath lab. And the first day I met Jess, I said, you know, I went to consent someone, and I came back and I said, Jess, they're asking me how many of these I've done before. And he gave me some advice. So the next patient I went to consent, they said, Dr. Patel, how many of these have you done? And I said, well, Dr. Peter and I have done over 20,000. Now, I had done one. And he'd done 20,000. And together, our team was quite powerful. And his insight was valuable. And he built our program with Dr. Pegard, Dr. Collin, Senior, and others. And this included the acute MI program at Duke, at a time when building it meant not just building it, but believing in it first. Lives were saved because of the conviction, including famously one patient who woke up convinced that he'd been rescued by Jesus Christ himself. It turned out it was Ken Morris, the fellow, which if you know Ken, was either a miracle or a reasonable mistake, but Jess loved telling this story about how he kept telling the patient, no, it was me. He was like, no, it's Jesus Christ. And when Ken Morris walked in, he goes, there's Jesus Christ. He received numerous awards during his career, and I would just say it was the Eugene Stead Award for Excellence in Teaching, the Tom Bayshore Award from the Fellows, and as you know, the Warren Newman Fellowship in Cardiology, the Jess Peter Interventional Fellowship. And you can see some of the history of that has come through. But what Jess built went beyond any one single program. It was a culture. And people talk about culture all the time, but I'll tell you, it's one where the team pulled for each other. It didn't matter if you were the nurse, the tech, the fellow. One of the things he taught you is you cared for each other and everyone knew why you were there. You were spending your time to make sure the patient did better. And he took the mission so seriously that he did it with humility and humor, which is rarer than it sounds. And underneath it all, in addition to the humor, was the curiosity you've heard. Questioning about the patient, asking about the next question, and honesty. And sometimes that honesty came across. As you've heard, he was on the microphone, and famously, there was a fellow working with a patient and just came over the microphone and said, if you do that again, that's going to lead to SD. Everyone sort of was like trying to figure out, and I said, sudden death. and I wasn't the fellow, but the fellow remembered looking at the patient was anxiously looking at the fellow. And some more sedation might have been given, but in general, Jess was helping give real, honest feedback. And it was that honesty, that ability to connect with people that never stopped, because Jess was continuously a student. He was continuously learning. He was asking questions that I think set the tone. At the end of every interventional year, we have a dinner. At the end of that dinner, Jess would give a toast. He would give a story, something about each of the fellows, and he would tell you what would go on. And in that toast, as we have heard today, you could hear his words. As some have already said, in those trying times when things are most hard for us sometimes in procedures. You can hear what Jess said. So, to the voices that we hear, many of which are faced forward by the legacy that we hope to continue to carry on from Dr. Peter, let this be a celebration to the biscuits, to the newspapers, to the calm in the storm, to the culture he built, to the curiosity he modeled, and to the patients, numerous, that are alive today by the lives he touched, not just the ones he touched here, but the ones he trained. And he showed up. He always showed up. We're lucky, and we knew it when we were with him. Thank you all.
Hi, Chris O'Connor here. I'm the only non-interventionalist cardiologist, non-invasive cardiologist to speak because I was left-handed in the cath lab and I failed Jess's training program. First of all, I want to thank Mary Ann and the children and the grandchildren for allowing us to reflect on Jess's life and how important he was to us. This is so healing for us and so important for us as it is with the family. And thank all the colleagues who've traveled really far. You heard from David Kanzeri and Sunil Rao and Bob Harrington in New York, Chip England. I don't know if everybody knows, he's one of the top NBA shooting coaches in the country. He's on the coaching staff of the Oklahoma Thunder, who won last night. Got on a plane after they played till midnight, got on a plane this morning, and his connection in Charlotte, I heard, was delayed, so he jumped in the car and got here in time. Thank you, Chip, for being here. That's really important. I first met Jess as an intern in 1983, and he was this esteemed cardiologist, an interventional cardiologist, and I looked at his attire and I said, is that L.L. Bean or J. Crew? I said, that doesn't look like how Sunil Rao and David Kanzeri dress. I mean, they were in Armani suits and fancy watches and this and that. But I was impressed how he interacted with patients and how, as I became a resident and a fellow and on faculty with him, I joined faculty as a colleague, and they formed this group called PCP, which was Peter Caliph Phillips. Dr. Caliph is here. And then Vic Bihar and Chuck Simonson, so it was PCP BS. We didn't really. And then Tom Wall and Chris O'Connor joined that as the non-invasive members of the group, which was basically cleaning up all the problems they created in the cath lab, either pre or post or in the clinic. But in today's world of technology, complex technology, Jess really represented something timeless. He was clearly a wizard in the cath lab. As you heard, he was the first to do a cath in the United States Navy. He was actually the first to do the PCI. I think he was the first to do PCI in the setting of acute myocardial infarction. He clearly was the first to extract wires out of every chamber of the heart that a fellow left in there. A left-handed fellow, named Chris O'Connor. And he was the first to cath a 500-pound patient, which was something that was hard to do back then. Like Coach K, he was really the GOAT of interventional cardiology. He was the Duke greatest of all time. I think we'll all appreciate that. But as a non-invasive cardiologist, I really reflect on things that he had learned from Dr. Stead and McIntosh and Orgain and Andy Wallace, was this humanistic approach to the care of the patients. His technical craft was beyond call, but he was really a doctor's doctor. He would often say, like Gene Stead said, what this patient needs is a doctor, Chris. And he was looking at me. When I would round with him as a fellow, he was so astute and had so much humor and connectivity with the patients. Sometimes the stethoscope was not in the ears when he was listening to the heart. It was on his neck. And I was amazed how he could hear the heart sounds. And I would ask him, I said, after he got out of the room, I didn't want to embarrass him in front of the patient. I said, Dr. Peter, you know that stethoscope wasn't in your ears. He said, my catheter was in the heart just an hour ago. I know what the heart looks like. As a non-invasive cardiologist, I often presented him with the most complex cases, patients with heart failure, multi-vessel coronary disease, comorbidities. And many physicians, even the surgeons, would say, no, I can't do this. And Jess said, I see a possibility to help here. I think we can help this patient. And through his willingness to help and give hope to patients, he improved the quality and quantity of life of thousands of patients he served. He was also remarkably committed to prevention as an interventional cardiologist. His passion to treat obesity was enormously strong, and risk factors. He really spent hours on round counseling patients about weight control and stopping smoking. I can only imagine today if he was practicing with all the GLP-1s we have, we would see GLP-1s dripping down the coronary arteries. He was such a warrior against obesity, and I think part of that was he just felt that much of this could be controlled by risk factor modification. He always put the weight of the patient when they were age 18 in the chart. I remember that today. And then he would put the weight of the patient when they presented to the hospital, maybe at age 65. And he would often ask me, why do you think the patient doubled in their weight? Why do you think? You know, and he would do that while he was eating a sausage biscuit. With his trim 160-pound weight, it never seemed to change over the course of his career. We had the celebration for Jess 20 years ago in this room. I think it was in this room. Everybody was dressed up. Jess was wearing a tuxedo. He came up to me, 165 pounds. All of us had gained a little weight. And he pulls it open and it says, after 6. I said, Jess, that's not really a fancy brand tuxedo after 6. I said, that's what I wore to my prom, I think, 5 years ago. He said, yeah, it's the tuxedo I wore to my wedding. I'm wearing the same one. And I said, darn, you're doing pretty damn good. Keeping the same weight for 30 to 40 years. But the story that I remember most that really reflects who Jess was happened in 2002. And at that time I was attending and we were rounding and you know, this was a year after 9/11. And I got a call from the Saudi ambassador, and they said, we had a relationship with Saudi Arabia at that time, and they said, Dr. O'Connor, the Queen has suffered a heart attack. We need a team to go over there to take care of her. And I said, oh my God, and this is like Tuesday. He said, I'll have my plane at RDU Friday for you to come. I thought, oh my God, I gotta get a team together. So I asked a few people if they wanted to go to Saudi Arabia. This was Labor Day weekend. Most of the people said, no, I don't want to go to Saudi Arabia a year after 9/11. And Jess said, yeah, I'd love to go. And then, of course, I called my colleague in crime in our leadership here, Mike Sketch, and he didn't want to go, but I said, Mike, you got to go. So the three of us ended up planning to go to Saudi Arabia. Now, on Wednesday, Jess comes up to me and says, Chris, I got a little problem. He says, my passport's not active. 48 hours before a trip to Saudi Arabia. I said, what am I going to do here? And so I said, okay, we're going to call Jesse Helms, the senator at that time, and we said, we're going to send Mike Sketch up to Washington to get the passport. We'll send somebody else. And we got the passports processed in 48 hours, and they returned it Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock to us. And then we drove to the airport, and Jess was able to go to Saudi Arabia. So he was so excited. We got on that plane. It was a private jet, only 6 seats. Jess had really never traveled like that before. He was wearing his LL Bean, J. Crew shirt. And the stewardess comes up and says, you know, we're serving filet mignon and lobster tonight. Which one would you like? He said both. As we knew he would. And so we ended up getting into Riyadh and landing and into the hotel. And as we're flying over there, I was telling Jess, now culturally we have to be a little disciplined over this. This is a conservative country, and your humor, which is interesting over in North Carolina, may not go well over in Saudi Arabia. And so he gets there, and the first thing that happens, we get our rooms, and he said, Chris, I called down for room service for a cheeseburger and a beer. I said, Jess, there's no alcohol in this country. What are you doing? They don't serve alcohol in this country. Please be careful. I said, now we're going to be, meeting with the royal family and everything after the calf, and so, you got to be disciplined in your conversations. And so they do the calf, Jess and Mike Sketch, and the Queen was 89 years old, and she was having really heart failure symptoms. The calf showed that her ejection fraction was 40 with severe MR, and had a 50 to 75 LAD and 100% surgery. And I said, God, this is great. This is medical therapy. We're out of here. I'm going to get back to our Labor Day party with the family by Monday. This was Saturday. And Jess says, we're going to give her ReoPro and open up that artery with a balloon. And I go, oh my God, not an 89-year-old. So Mike and I did convince Jess to say, well, why don't we try a little medical therapy first and see how she does. She ended up doing reasonably well over the subsequent year. But when we had the conversation with the family after the calf, explaining the results, Jess was so excited, did the calf safely, everything was good. And he said, the Queen has a heart as strong as a man. And I looked at Jess and said, Jess, we're in Saudi Arabia. Things like that about the Queen. And everybody, all the royal families looking at each other. I said, we need to call this meeting off now, and we're ready to get home, get the airplane to bring us back. But I think what this reminds us of is that as we move into an era of artificial intelligence and advanced technology and data-driven care, the technology will change. But what Jess taught us was about human connection and the ability to connect with people, with humor, with meaningful conversation, with counsel, and the ability to offer hope. And I think these are the lessons that will endure for all of us. These are the lessons that he taught us as physicians, what he taught all healthcare providers, not just physicians, what he taught many, many trainees, and what he really offered to many, many thousands of patients that he served. And I think as we look forward as a community here, celebrating the life of Jess, I think it's our obligation to carry that torch forward, his joy and purpose in his life and in his job, to carry that forward in a meaningful way. That would be his legacy. Thank you.
If anybody else would like to say anything, and maybe start off with Andrew Wallace. Did you have something? And if it's easier to read there, we do have an open mic. Would you prefer me to bring that to you, or if you want to come up?
Is it on?
Yep.
So my name is Andrew Wallace, and I'm honored to speak on behalf of my dad, Andy Wallace, and our family today.
Speak into the microphone, please.
Is that better? So Jess and our dad came into the world just one day apart in March of 1935. They first met at the train station 18 years later, boarding a bus to begin their freshman year at Duke. From that point on, their lives stayed closely connected in ways that feel extraordinary looking back. They lived across the quad from each other. Both joined the track team, and after graduation found their way back to Duke as young physicians, eventually becoming part of the generation that helped build Duke cardiology into what it is today. When their paths were shared, their contributions were different in ways that complemented each other beautifully. Jess was one of the early leaders in interventional cardiology. He helped advance new ways of treating heart disease and trained generations of physicians along the way. He was a teacher and a steady presence. His voice calm, thoughtful, and wise. It stayed with many long after they left. Dad recalls the tremendous respect Jess earned from his patients as well. He had a way of stepping into the most challenging cases with confidence and the ability to find solutions others couldn't. And together, Dad and Jess were part of a generation that didn't just practice medicine, they helped build it. They created the foundation that so many others have stood on. And what stands out isn't just what they built professionally, it's what they built personally. Jess and Marianne and our parents, Andy and Barry, shared long, enduring marriages and raised 3 children each. They celebrated milestones, including Dad and Jess, shared birthdays, supported one another, and built a community that extended far beyond the hospital. One tradition many remember well is the annual lobster party for graduating cardiology fellows. It was simple, grew bigger than anyone anticipated, and meant a lot for the culture they built within Duke Cardiology. It reflected who Jess was and who both families were. Jess cared deeply about people, made space for connection, he welcomed others in, and he was really good at lobsters and corn. In retirement, the friendship between the Peters and the Wallaces deepened. Jess and Marianne spent time with our parents sailing, hiking, enjoying nice meals, and being together at their respective farms, both in New Hampshire and in Maine. It was a continuation of something that had already lasted decades. For Dad, Jess was far more than a colleague. He was a friend for over 70 years, a constant presence, and a shared witness to a lifetime of experiences, both professional and personal. And for our family, Jess and Marianne and their children, John, Alex, and Jennifer, have always been part of the fabric of our lives. We are deeply grateful for that friendship and for the life Jess lived.
Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add? If not, before we call back Dr. Ramsey, I thought with all these beautiful comments, there's 2 sentences that Joe Kislow said that I think really ties so much of what everybody said together. And this is what he had said to Marianne. There are so many people that Jess touched and held him so dear. If only the rest of us could command that kind of trust, respect, and love. And with that, I'd like to ask Dr. Ramsey to come back up.
So 2026, I turned 60 in March, and my wife says, "What do you want for your birthday?" And I said, "I want to say thank you. I want this to spread for everyone here to send a thank you note to Mama Peter on your birthday from this year going forward into 2027. The blessing is you look around this room. We are all connected through Dr. Peter. I became connected through the friend of a friend, through Chris Weinberg, who went to the Pilgrim Christian Church and was friends with Alex. And then Alex and I became friends. And we were playing football at Githens in Jordan. And it goes from middle school, and I had the opportunity to have Dr. Peter as a father figure. And then later on, after I graduated from Appalachian State as a B student, he's like, "Keith, we need some interventional cardiac cath techs in the lab." I didn't know what an interventional cardiac cath tech was, but I was like, I want that opportunity from selling hot dogs one week after graduation to taking ACLS and taking BLS and learning telemetry. And like Dr. Sketch and Dr. Califf and Dr. Connor said, it's the connections. We're all connected. That's the true blessing of learning that it goes beyond this. We have angels in this room right now. The blessing of working with Mama Jean Curtis, one of the charge nurses there, meeting Miss Patty and Miss Cindy. Those charge nurses were there for my 2 years. And working beside Dr. Slick Vic Behar and Dr. Stack and Dr. Sketch, and meeting Dr. Kong and Dr. Harry Phillips and Dr. Jimmy Chang. These guys were top in their field, and I was a technician from Appalachian State. And those technicians who were there with us went on to become physicians, went on to get their doctorates in nurse practitioner and that kind of thing. That is the blessing that we are all connected. And I drove here from New Iberia, Louisiana, with my wife, Deborah, from Opelousas, Louisiana, that I got to meet when she was here at IBM doing her internship and later was hired to do software testing. So it's a blessing that we have these unusual God-sent blessings that connects us. Here's the blessing. I'm seeing a patient with diabetes and hypertension and high cholesterol. I'm a family physician, not an interventionist, but I learned from Dr. Zadar and Dr. Califf and Dr. Sketch and saw them come in as fellows. And as I'm going through her ACE inhibitor and looking at her statins, she says, "Did a friend of yours pass when you were a child? And did his name begin with the letter C?" I told her his name was Cortland. He was 12. I was 14. He was being treated at Duke Pediatric Oncology for leukemia. She tells me, "He still comes and checks on you." This Cajun woman, over 1,000 miles away in Louisiana, is telling me about my childhood friend from Durham, North Carolina, who transitioned during the same time period when I moved to the county schools and 3 new friends came into my life: Alex, Chris, Joey. And through those connections that we have that friendship today, over 40 years later. The blessing is that it goes beyond this, that his spiritual energy will continue to bless us beyond this. And I want you to continue this thank you for 2026 into 2027. So Lord, we thank you for Dr. Peter. We thank you for blessing him and sending him as a blessing to us, to encourage us, to inspire us, and to share his love with us. We thank you for these blessings and those blessings that are unseen. In your holy name, we say thank you, yes, and amen, in Jesus' name.